Right, start broadcast. So just wait for people to come in. So there's people joining now. So I'll just give it a few minutes, everybody, for everyone to join. They're all dropping in. So, and then we'll get started. So what have you been doing today? You had a nice day?
I've been working. I kind of pleaded to have a more or less uninterrupted day, but yeah, which I sort of got.
And then I turned up, yeah.
I've got less hours in my day at the moment because, with my son homeschooling and somehow.
I know, I've got both.
He's been great. He's been great. I've not had to do anything. He's been kind of getting on with it, but they're sort of, nevertheless, they're around and popping up and.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I've got two girls. They sort of wander in and ask to be fed in the middle of a Zoom meeting or something.
Exactly.
So, right, we've got a good number in now, so I think we should get started.
Fantastic.
Right, so hello and welcome everybody. I'm the chair of the Society of Women Writers and Journalists, and this is the first in our up close and personal online series of interviews with authors. So today I'm delighted to have Jessica Fellowes joining us. Jessica's an author, a journalist and a public speaker. As a journalist, she's written for the Mail on Sunday, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, the Sunday Times, and was former deputy editor of Country Life magazine. More recently, she's become well known for her books. She's written a number of accompanying books to Downton Abbey, and now she's written the exciting Mitford Murder mystery series. And these books are great fun and a romp through the 1920s with the famous Mitford sisters. There'll be a chance for people to ask questions at the end of the session, so please use the little Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screens. So, Jessica, welcome. How's lockdown been for you? How's lockdown been for you?
It's great to be here. It's kind of odd. This is actually the only Zoom interview I've done with me, although I've been seeing a few and kind of my husband's been taking part in a few. So it's that kind of slightly odd sensation where we've got a few of us together in my room. Where I'm normally sitting all by myself. So I'm just going Becca and I, we just agreed I'll talk for a little bit, but I don't want this to be a monologue. I really like questions and, much rather talk interactively. But anyway, so here you are, you see me here. Try to remember to look at the camera and not myself in the corner. But this is my home office. It's a pretty scrappy place, as you can see. I'm literally in the attic. I'm not starving, thankfully, but I'm literally in the attic. But I've got little drawings up here. This is the drawing that my 9-year-old, nearly 10-year-old son did of Thoth, the god of writing, when he was doing Egyptian studies. So he looks down on me and brings me good luck. And then I'm on a sort of 2 tables shoved together corner desk. And there's nothing really terribly organised about it all. I was in quite a nice home office downstairs, but the mother-in-law moved in and the lockdown, and so I've been pushed back up to the scruffy room again. And my husband works at the other end of the office, and then I boot him out when he's on the phone too much, and I need to
concentrate. So does that work, or does that end up being arguments?
I know, yeah, exactly. Well, we've worked opposite each other on a little kitchen table for a long time, and that was really how we both started out together. But I do find now that I'm working in fiction, I need longer, quieter times to get on with it. So, we've been in lockdown now, haven't we, I've lost count. I stopped counting quite early on. Some time. I found it quite difficult at first. I was quite grateful for the fact that I pretty much finished the first draft of the next novel that's coming out, because I think if I'd had to do those final 10,000 words at the beginning of lockdown, I would have really struggled. So I think the distraction and the stress of what was happening, that feeling when we were all really in the bunker, I couldn't really read. I found it quite difficult to write. So that was quite tough for the first couple of weeks. And then I was quite lucky because I'd done the first draft. I'm sort of interspersing finishing the next novel with a new project, because that was something completely different to think about. I think in some ways it made it a bit easier. So now, as time has gone on, the routine has come back. But it's quite interesting, given that I've always worked from home, or I've worked from home rather, I should say, for the last 2008 I went freelance, 12 years. And I was doing quite a bit of working from home then anyway, you know, as a writer, you just always do. I was interested about how much of a struggle it was with the lockdown, that it created a new routine, you know, and lots of people would be saying, oh, you must be writing acres of words. And it's like, well, no, not really. You know, sort of writers are quite light routine, I think, or it's quite necessary, which is for me anyway, to sort of sit down at the same sort of time and know that I'm just going to get on, you know, to show up my desk. So I found that quite interrupted. But it was
having the children around as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, I'm so lucky. We're in the country. I've got this window here that you can see. There's a view out to fields and the garden, and so that's a nice, you know, peaceful thing. And so I mean, for the first few weeks, in a funny sort of way, it was almost like it wasn't really happening. You couldn't really tell. It wasn't like being in London or a town where you could see the streets were really empty. Apart from going to the supermarket, it was a bit of a spooky experience at the start of lockdown. You know, we tried to give it a bit of a summer holiday feel. We all had that, you know, incredible weather. So we were quite, you know, so I do feel very lucky from that point of view. And we had a new dog as well. So we've got 2 big dogs.
Excellent.
Had to be walked every day. So that was a good part of the routine.
You still have the 2 chickens?
Yes, well, no, one. Funny enough, called Butch. And she has turned out to be the most Butch of all of them. She's still with us. I'm working at the moment, so I'm finishing. I've done, this is the last book, which came out in paperback on lockdown, The Mitford Scandal, for those of you who can't read backwards. That's the 3rd in the Mitford Murder series. So of course, you know, books coming out during lockdown was a bit of an unusual experience because we couldn't do all the usual
launches,
events or signings. Also quite hard for publishers to place books for sale because so many independent bookshops do really well selling my books, and of course they shut. And supermarkets do often also order my books, but they were making room for essential items, less so for books. So we got smaller supermarket orders than usual. So it's you know, it has caused a bit of a ruckus in the publishing industry. And the next book was going to be coming out in September. That's now been pushed back to November because so many books that were supposed to come out in the spring are coming out in September. So there'll be a big onslaught of new books in September, I think.
Lucky for us.
It's quite a critical time though for publishing. It's one of those things where the most books are sold in those 3 months. I think something like 80% of all book sales are done in the 3 months that lead up to Christmas. So it's a really important time in the publishing calendar. At the same time, that means there's masses and masses of books jostling for position. So quite hard to get yourself noticed if you're a new writer or writer. Yeah.
No, I've been reading this one, which I've really enjoyed. It's fantastic. A really sort of relaxed romp. But I love the fact you set it in the 1920s, which is actually quite an unusual time period. I mean, most of the historical fiction I read all seems to be Tudor or sort of Middle Ages, that sort of thing. So what made you choose the 1920s?
Well, the 1920s really, because I've had such a long association with that period now. I mean, it was always an era for me that I found interesting. I was always very close to my uncle, Julian Fellowes. So he was the youngest of my father's 4 brothers. And so he was quite a young uncle when I was born, and he didn't get married till I was 16. So I was a sort of surrogate daughter for him for quite a long time. We used to go on holiday together, and we used to hang out together. And he had an interest in that period, obviously. So Julian, you know, Julian wrote Downton Abbey later on, as it were, and Gosford Park. But what we used to talk about all the time were all our family stories. So my grandfather, his father, was born in 1912, grew up as a young child into the First World War and then the subsequent life after it. And Julian had, in the 60s, got to know a lot of this sort of more distant relatives and talked to them about this world that they felt was crumbling away as the 1960s was arriving. That was the social revolution then. So he found out about the fact that you could get 18 different types of teaspoon, you know, melon spoon or grapefruit spoon, and he was just sort of fascinated by this world that had
detail
existed before. And so he's talked about that. That led me on to reading a lot of 1920s, 1930s authors. So I always had that interest. And then when Julian wrote the first series of Downton Abbey, and it was a big hit, and I watched it and enjoyed it like everybody else did. And then my agent, I just started to move away from journalism and into book writing. That was why, you know, I'd done the freelance and I wanted to do book writing and non-fiction work. And I was sort of had done a couple of books. And anyway, my agent heard that the Downton Abbey production had done a deal with a publishing company and were looking for a writer. And so she said, I think you ought to put yourself forward. I emailed Julian and said, do you mind if there's another J Fellowes on the project? Because it seemed a bit cheeky in a way. None of it is my creation. Anyway, he was very sweet. He agreed to let me do that.
That's great. So was it him that inspired you into writing, or were you a writer? And then, because he came into writing quite late, didn't he? Am I right in thinking that?
We all say that Julie and I say that we both started our writing careers at the same sort of time. Although it's not a comparison I love, because he's won Oscars and Emmys and God knows what since.
I think it's just a matter of time.
So he in fact is, and it's not really true because he had written novels, but it was, you know, when I was growing up, he was an actor. That was really what he did. He was
I remember.
And it wasn't really about writing. And no, I don't know. I think when I was younger, I loved reading. I was always a very big reader, but I didn't particularly think I would do that. I just don't think I ever thought I would have the confidence to take on other writers, as it were. You know, when you read a lot, you're very conscious of what good writing is. And I sort of had this vague idea. I remember I did say to a couple of times, I said, I'll write a novel when I'm 40. That sort of in the end was more or less, I was 40 when I, 40, 41, I think, when I first started doing the novels. So I don't, but definitely once I'd got started, Julian was a great person to talk to. And I like to get his feedback on stuff that I do without putting him in a position of responsibility for the writing, you know. So we have to kind of keep our work separate in that way.
So how did you make the transition from being a journalist to a fiction writer? Because they're very different skills.
Yeah.
And a lot of people struggle. They'll be a very good journalist but can't quite write a novel. Or they're a good novelist but can't quite write an article. So how did you make that transition?
Yeah, no, they are different. Well, I think I was quite lucky in that I did make the decision when I was in journalism. The thing is, I was in journalism. I left Country Life magazine in April 2008, and then in September was when we had the financial crisis. So it was a really good time to be freelance, having left my really nice steady job. But anyway, you know, that was what I'd done. But I wanted to work for myself. So I'd already made that transition, I think, from just that sort of self-discipline, I think, of just sitting at home and meeting a deadline, not being surrounded by an office. And actually, I love collaborative work. I still miss that about journalism. But I decided to go into non-fiction first. I thought that would make the best use of my journalistic skills, to be a ghost writer, or just interview people for books. I did a book with a psychologist about how to spot psychopaths, and I did
useful. Oxford.
Very useful. And I did a couple of business books and that sort of thing. And what I was doing, it was quite a deliberate move in a way. It was that I wanted to see if I was capable of doing a long-term project, because one of the exciting things about being a journalist is the deadlines are very fast. You know, you can get given a brief in the morning that you turn in by the afternoon, and I love that. But I wanted to see if I could really do some forward planning and think ahead. And I wanted to have a family. I didn't want to be firefighting journalism all the time, just particularly in the crash when it all just got difficult. That thing of having to come up with ideas and pitch for proposals and chase money all the time, and it's tough work. Very little of your freelance journalistic life had spent actually writing. So I, that was what I wanted to be doing more of. Anyway, and then I obviously got Downton Abbey gig, and then I did 5 books with Downton, 5 or 6 books, I think, with Downton Abbey, 6 books. And I did a lot of research into the Between the Wars era for all of those books, because the books were about how the series was made, but really also about explaining the social history context of the period. And then I did a lot of public speaking around America, so I was really immersed in the social history of that period. And I knew that after the Downton Abbey books were finished, that I wanted to try fiction, and I knew that I wanted to do something that was set in the same era, but it made sense of something that I was interested in and something that I was becoming known for. So it was, it was partly a personal and partly a marketing decision, if you like. So I was kind of kicking an idea around. I started writing a novel, which I'm actually now writing into a novella for an Italian publisher this summer, which just goes to show it doesn't always go to waste. Keep everything you write, just in case, even if you think it's awful, just file it somewhere, because it might just come back. You'll just see something in it that works. Anyway, so I was kind of kicking this black around with not too much success, sort of wondering what to do. I think I wrote about 25,000 words, something like that. And then I got approached by a publisher called Ed Wood, who was at Little Brown, and I'd done a short piece for him. He used to work as an editor at the Bookseller magazine, which is a publishing trade magazine. He'd commissioned me to do a Downton Abbey piece. And he said that when I thanked him later for approaching me with the book, he said, well, you were nice to work with, and you got your work done quickly, and you handed it in on time. And I said, oh, thank God it was that week. Can you imagine? But anyway, so it also goes to show that you never know, you just don't know who you're meeting on the way up. So anyway, he approached me and said that he would like to write would like me to write a crime series based on the Mitford sisters, with each book in the series based on a different sister. And that was it. That was all he said. He said, would you be interested in that? And I said, I love the idea, but I'd go away and think about it. And so I went away and thought about it. I knew a lot about the Mitford sisters. But it was when I came up with the idea of my fictional protagonist, Louisa Cannon, that I got excited, because my feeling with the Mitford sisters, I'm sure most people are familiar with who they are, but I mean, they are 6 famous sisters who lived between the wars. They were upper class, they were completely eccentric. There's the most extraordinary mix between them. So Nancy Mitford, the eldest, was a novelist. The next one, Pamela, is our sort of she's the one. I mean, it's funny that I made that slip. She's the one that everyone sort of forgets about in a way. I think she was the rock of the family. She was the straightforward kind of countrywoman. Then you have Diana Mitford, who became Diana Guinness when she married a rich heir, and then left him for Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Fascist Party. Unity Mitford, who became obsessed with Hitler and sort of more or less became a Nazi. Jessica Mitford, who ran off with a communist cousin, and lastly Deborah, who became the Duchess of Devonshire. So I mean, it's the most extraordinary kind of bunch of people. But the thing about them is that I think lots of people have attempted to do something with them before, because they were famous in their own lifetime and very beautiful and witty and all those things, but they're not that likable. They're quite difficult women, and it would be hard. I felt it would be hard to make people be interested in what was really happening to each one of them over 6 years. I wanted somebody that you could really get behind and be sympathetic to. And so that's Louisa Cannon. So she's my main sort of protagonist really in the books, and she's the one who kind of goes and works for them, and that's how we get to know them. And then she's involved with solving crimes with her sort of love interest, Guy Sullivan, who works for the police. So that was kind of how I did it. I mean, then now I just, but the advantage I had with Ed was that he was willing to kind of guide me through the process. He knew this was a debut novel for me, And so I was really able to, in a way that you wouldn't often, I think, with the first novel, I was able to go to him throughout work, you know, this plot, does that work? And he really helped me kind of walk my way through it. And I've just gone through, so the fourth book that I've just done is the first book that I've delivered as an entire first draft without stopping at 80,000, 40,000 words or 60,000 words and sending it in to him and then getting it back, you know. So essentially I've been paid to take a masterclass in novel writing, which has been extraordinary.
That is great.
Extraordinarily lucky.
Yeah. So when you're trying to do a character, like when you've got the Mitford sisters and you've got factual people, but then you have to add fictional elements when you're writing the book, how do you go about that? How do you develop a character around them?
Well, I try to, the rule I've got is that I don't make anybody who was real do anything that they really wouldn't have done in real life. By which I mean, I don't make them do something that they morally wouldn't have done in real life. So of course in the Mitfords, that gives you still quite a wide remit.
Communism to Nazism.
So, but of course I'm putting them in fictional situations, but I think what I'm also, the other thing I felt was that I'm not writing biographies of these women. If you want to read biographies of these women, there are lots, and I recommend them at the end of every novel. What I'm writing about is the kind of the gaps in between almost, you know. I'm interested in what got them from there to there, you know. So how was it that those parents produced 6 very different daughters and a son as well? There's Tom Mitford, who's actually going to be in the 4th novel. So he gets a little bit sidelined by his groovy glamorous sisters. So I think it's about kind of exploring that, and I think when you allow yourself to go in between the gaps, then your imagination can run quite freely. And I think, you know, lots of people find it kind of a slightly shocking thing to do in a way, because I think they're in the recent past. But when I point out that people have been doing it about Elizabeth I or Henry VIII or, you know, Queen Victoria, and then of course you've got now, in a way, much more exploration of that sort of thing, like The Crown on Netflix, and looking at the living royal family. And I always feel like it's quite a cheek imagining conversations that they would have had when they haven't had them. But I think you're allowed to imagine how somebody might have responded to a situation. And there are certain things. I've been amazed actually at how okay everyone has been with it. I was expecting kind of letters along the lines of, you know, Nancy would never wear a pink silk shirt or whatever. But I have tried to put in little details so that if you are a Mitford aficionado, you should recognise little tiny, slightly quirky pieces of knowledge about them. And if you don't know who they are, it doesn't really matter. And you know, the fact is that actually, although there are some Anglophiles in America who know who the Mitford sisters are, and in fact Jessica Mitford was a very big name in America where we haven't really heard much about her over here. In all the other countries, the books sell in about 19, 20 different countries, territories.
Brilliant.
And most of them have never heard of the Mitford sisters.
Yeah, well, they are totally freestanding. Yeah. You know, you can read it and not know a thing. But one of the things I found out when I was researching you was the fact that you're deaf, which and it made me wonder whether it's actually affected the way that you write, because you are probably more observant than maybe someone like me. Does that affect the way that you write the characters? Are you able to show behaviour in a different way, do you think, because of it?
I'm going to put it like that. So yeah, no, I am deaf. I wear, I don't know if you can see them, but I wear big behind the ear hearing aids, and I have done since I was a small girl. Didn't get discovered till I was 2 years old, because I didn't have the test then. But anyway, so since then I have, and I'm fairly deaf. I'm much less deaf than I used to be, thanks to the digital hearing aids.
I think they're very good, aren't they?
Yeah, they're much better. I was much deafer when I was younger. So in some ways, deafness definitely made me a reader. So when I was a young girl, I read a lot because it was just quite tiring to be in the hearing world, and so I could quite happily sit with a book for 6 or 7 hours and just get lost in that world. So I think the fact that I read a lot, I mean, any writer has got to have read a lot. There's just no
Yes.
shortcut to that. So it definitely did that. But how I observe people, I think there's such a good point. I do think that in a funny way, I'm a better listener because I'm deaf, just because I'm forced to really listen, and I'm forced to pick up on clues to help me with what the person is saying. So because I do still rely on lip reading quite a lot. And so you do rely on those visual clues when you're talking to someone. You can't quite hear what they're saying. You understand they've just told you a joke, or they've just asked you a question, or they've said something insulting, or, you know, you just, and sometimes you get it wrong, but you know, most of the time I think you do get it right. So hopefully I think I do, and I think I do sit and observe people. I mean, I do know that I am that slightly mad person staring on the bus sometimes. Sort of just watching a conversation go on, and I've always enjoyed kind of trying to work out what the story is when you see a couple rowing in the street, or you know, somebody's shopping trolley, or, you know, just sort of always, you know, probably because I wasn't listening into a conversation or having a conversation, particularly if I'm out and about, it's quite difficult to have a conversation with all the different background noises going on. So I am more usually just watching things. So I think, you know, that has been my advantage.
Does help you. But did it affect your education in any way? Whether, you know, in the way that you developed? I mean, it's hard to be in a classroom.
What is it? I don't know. I mean, my parents were quite unusual because the fashion definitely then, I was born in 1974, and the fashion in the late 70s for special needs children was to send them to special needs schools. Which my parents really didn't want. I mean, I went to school for deaf children for 3 days, I think, and they pulled me out. And the other children just seemed much more deaf. And also, my parents had just worked always to help me think that I was just a part of the normal world, and there was no reason not to be. And my mother spent a long time doing elocution. She was an actress, so we did a lot of elocution exercises. I do have some slight things in my voice, but whether I would have had those or not, or whether they're deafness things, I don't really know. I can't pronounce my R's, you know, that's probably nothing to do with deafness really. But no, so my parents, I mean, no, the only thing that happened was that they wanted me to go to the local state school, but it was all open plan. So I did the state school for a couple of terms or a year, and I just couldn't pick up on anything. It was just too difficult to hear what the teacher was saying. So I went to private school, and I was very lucky. I went to one of the girls' day school trusts, which are practically all bursaries and scholarships. So I had what was called an assisted place. So I was able to have an essentially free private education. But I mean, you know, there was nothing like the concessions. I just did normal GCSE. I mean, my French GCSE and French A level, I think I may have had some concession on the oral exams.
Yes. Otherwise,
yeah, not really. You know, it was a totally different world then. You know, you just kind of got on with it, which I think was probably not a bad thing. There are definitely pros and cons to that, but you know, overall, I came out all right.
Yeah, you don't seem too bad. Well, I'm going to just remind everybody that if they want to ask a question, can you use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen? Well, I just asked my last question, Jessica, and then I'll switch to anyone else's. So use the Q&A box. It's at the bottom right-hand side.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, everybody should be able to see it there. So a lot of the people that are watching are aspiring writers or writers themselves. So what advice would you give them? What would be your top tips for people?
Top tips for writing. Well, first of all, they're better than me. There are 2 books, I think, which are the best books. The first one is Stephen King's book on writing. Even if you're not a Stephen King fan, which I wasn't, although I did subsequently read Misery, which is really good. He's just really good on the discipline of being a writer and how to just make that time, and the discipline of reading, and how you've just got to read, you know. And you're just not interested in anyone saying they haven't got time to read. There's always time to read. You know, if you're waiting for the kettle to boil, you're reading. You notice the difference between how you read when you've got a really good book going. You know, suddenly you're finding every 5 minutes that you can get a few more pages in, and you're suddenly reading that book really quickly, aren't you? You know, so that and give up on the books that aren't good. Life's too short. I never used to. I used to think that I had to finish every single book, but I don't anymore. I do stop. So On Writing by Stephen King, and another book called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, which is a bit harder to find, but she's really good on just the pleasures of writing and how writing is not just about being published, but just, you know, finding your groove as a writer. So I think that's really important. That's something that I did a lot without even realizing, just unconsciously. If ever I had a problem, I always wrote it out. I always kind of tried to spin out the narrative in some way. And I've got piles and piles of scraps of ideas, just things I wrote down about something that I saw. And, you know, sometimes it goes in the drawer and I almost don't look at it again, but I still feel like it's there somewhere. So I think in terms of just developing yourself as a writer, just writing for the pleasure of it, just writing things out, you know, what's happening that day, whatever form you want to take that in. And then for getting noticed, you know, then you have to get a bit canny about putting together a really good book proposal. But the thing about that book proposal, I think, if I was only allowed to give one sort of really important tip, is that just remember that whoever you're sending that book proposal to has to sell your book. You know, and I mean not just sell your book to bookshops, but sell your book in the company. They have to go to the marketing guy, the finance guy, you know, the publishing director, and say why this book should be out there. And you need to make it as easy as possible for them. So why you're the best person to write this book, why you're going to help sell this book too, because, you know, never leave it all to the publishers. They've got a lot of books that they're bringing out. You need to do a lot of work yourself to promote the book. You know, why do you understand who the reader is and how you can talk to them? You know, as much help as you could give them to say that you're going to really push this forward, not just, oh, it's my personal project and this is the story I've always wanted to tell, you know, whatever, you know, that's very nice, but, you know, just your family can read that. Why does everyone else read it, and how are you going to make sure that message gets out there? I think it's a really important part of the proposal.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Cancy has just asked, could you just repeat the second book title and the author again, please?
Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
That's great. So somebody else has asked, who is your favourite author and why? Authors?
Well, I'm pretty useless at number one, you know, there only being one person. My son, my 9-year-old is always doing this. Do you find this with children? You always have to name them, your favourite thing. I don't know. It depends on the mood I'm in. I mean, I probably, Evelyn Waugh is probably the one that I keep going back to, A Handful of Dust by Evelyn Waugh. But then the book I read on almost an annual basis is my brain's gone, Kazuo Ishiguro's book about the butler, Remains of the Day.
Oh yes, Remains of the Day.
Remains of the Day, I think, is probably the bit that I go back to again and again, and because it's just so extraordinary that for somebody for whom English is not his first language, and he's a modern writer, and he's so absolutely gets it right about that period in the 1930s, and the way in which he infers feelings and emotions in an incredibly subtle and nuanced way. I just think it's the most perfect piece of writing.
Yes, I haven't read it either, so you've inspired me to now. So.
It's not even very long, but it was the one that made me think that maybe I was allowed to write a 1920s, 1930s book from the modern standpoint, because I normally read those books by the authors of the time. You know, I don't read many authors who said. Kate Atkinson, she also wrote a wonderful book called Life After Life, which is also before the war. She does that absolutely beautiful, where she's somebody else who wears her research incredidly lightly. Sorry, I didn't give you one answer there, but
that's great. Several's good. I'm glad I've read one. That's good. Right, Viv Brown says, what is your ultimate dream as a writer, and have you achieved it yet?
No, you can't. You mustn't. I don't want to achieve my ultimate dream really till I'm back, just before I, you know, pop my clogs or whatever it's called. No, I haven't. I very much see the series as something I've been doing, which I've really been enjoying, but as something that takes me on to the next stage. And I think every time I get to one stage, I start getting quite excited about where I think it can take me next. So at the moment, I'm writing, my current project is an adaptation for television, which I've never done before. So it's so I've been asked by some producers to take a book as a loose basis for a television series again, and it's set in Paris in the 1930s. If I could pull that off, then I'd absolutely love that. I'd love to, and I love the idea of just being able to write across two different mediums in that way, because I love the idea of doing TV work, because it's back to doing something that's very collaborative, which I've slightly missed.
Yes.
I'm very used to sitting in my office by myself, and I'm quite happy doing that in lots of ways, but it would be really nice to have that. It's more the feedback of ideas than anything else.
Bouncing.
Just bounce those ideas around. That's really fun. And then I would like to write a memoir as well.
Of anybody particular? You mean of yourself?
I think it's partly, I read somewhere that the heaviest weight of the UK population is people in their sort of 40s and 50s, i.e. my kind of age group. And I think we've all reached the age where our childhoods have started to become very nostalgic periods. And so I quite fancy writing something about my childhood, because it was quite unusual, partly with my deafness and partly because my parents there was an actor, my mother was an actress, and my father was a sort of hippie and filmmaker, and they were the bohemians, and it was quite a glamorous and quite different kind of life to the ones that anybody else that I went to school with went to. And I just noticed that quite a few of my school friends would sort of have these incredibly vivid memories of coming to my house. And I thought, well, we might make quite a fun memoir. So I'd quite like to write that out.
That sounds brilliant.
Things I want to do.
Oh, well, Pam Payne's asked if any of the younger members of the family are interested in writing.
Younger members of the family?
Of your family, yeah.
Well, my 9-year-old son, he's very good at writing, actually, but I think partly because I do it, he slightly shies away from it. But he's a reader, which is great, which is very nice for me. Although I'm very relaxed about when children pick up books. There's a lot of pressure on children at the moment to read. The emphasis is very much on children reading, which is obviously a good thing when we're all battling to have them spend less time on screens and things. But I really believe reading needs to be a pleasure, and children have to kind of find their way to books. So just let them read anything. That's my number one tip. Don't worry about them reading the Victorian classics. What they want to read is Dark Knights of the Space Invaders comic, then that's great, because it's enough that lets them see they can get pleasure from a two-dimensional page.
Yeah, no, that's great.
That's all that matters.
Right, so Marilyn Wallace says, I'd like to read the Mitford Murders, having read Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate. Which of your books should I start with? Is there a chronology?
Thank you very much. First of all, I mean, Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate are two of the most wonderful books. So I wouldn't stack myself up next to her at all. I love Nancy's writing. Well, I mean, it sort of depends. I mean, it's quite interesting now we've got further into the series, because when you've just written the first two, everybody always starts with the first book.
Yeah.
But now as we've gone further, and they are written to be standalone, and of course you always, like all of them have got something different going on, so start with the first one, and then you might read the other two. But the Mitford Murder you might enjoy if you've just read Love in a Cold Climate, because it has got Nancy at the forefront, and there are certain elements of what I felt I knew about Nancy's character, because those two books are quite autobiographical. So you might recognise a lot of Nancy in the Mitford Murder, so you might enjoy that. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's good. Right, Steve Dalglish says, do you miss journalism at all? Oh no, it's Carolyn actually. I think using a different account.
I do miss journalism a bit. I mean, occasionally I get called and asked to write an article, and I enjoy that kind of rush of turning something round quite fast. But it and sometimes I get nostalgic for the days, just the fun days that I used to have in journalism, when there was a bit more money sloshing, and I was quite lucky. When I worked in the noughties, and it was all sort of big PR budgets and lunches and all that kind of thing that I did.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you don't really get that so much anymore. I missed feeling in the thick of it. That was fun, feeling that you knew what was happening before anyone else knew it. But I've still got a few good friends in journalism, so I kind of get my bits of gossip, and I've got friends who are columnists for national broadsheets, and I, once or twice a week I get quite a fun flurry of emails. What do I think about this? Should they write about this, or should I say, and so I get that little insight. So
it sounds like you're the power behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I'm not, but it's kind of, it's just, you get that little kind of frisson.
Yeah.
I don't think I would ever go back to it full time. I think I'm too out of the loop now. I think even with all the technology and everything, I think it's all moved on quite a bit in 10 years. But no, I definitely miss it a bit.
Yeah, that's great. Right, and then Mary says, was it difficult to write the Downton books following such a successful TV series?
Well, there was definitely pressure to measure up, and I think what I felt was that it wasn't my creation. I was writing something to support an extremely strong brand with a lot of interest all around the world. And on a more personal level, I wanted to make Julian proud. I didn't want him to regret backing me to do this. I mean, the publishers, obviously liked the fact that Julian was happy with me writing the books. I mean, they also liked the fact that I'd been deputy editor of Country Life magazine, and so I sort of knew my stuff with the houses, and I knew about that 1930s world, 1920s world, and I liked the fact that they wanted that social history element. So there was, but I definitely needed it to stand up. So it was quite intimidating, and also I had to write it in a very short amount of time. The turnarounds were always super quick, just because the series would be coming out, and you'd have to be sort of writing it when they were filming, and and then getting out in time for the next series to come out, and so on. So it was, and they were big colour books, so they had to be printed in China and then shipped back from China. So it all was, that side of it took ages, which meant everything, the deadlines got tighter and tighter. So that side of it was very intimidating. But I've got to say, for anybody who was involved in Downton Abbey, it was an incredibly exciting group of people to be a part of, and to be part of something so successful and so renowned, and kind of gave all of us who were part of it such incredible opportunities afterwards. So I'm never anything less than completely grateful to it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Jessica, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant meeting you, and I'm sure everyone else has enjoyed it as well. Yeah, and this recording, we recorded this as well, so it will be available on our website, and if people want it, we'll be able to send it to them.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you. Take care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye.